April 6, 1945. The waters off Okinawa, stretching into the East China Sea, were calm as first light revealed Task Force 58 of the United States Fifth Fleet. On radar picket destroyers, stationed 16 miles ahead of the main formation, sailors maintained a tense vigil, scanning the horizon for the inevitable approach of enemy aircraft. Within the Combat Information Center of the USS Lee, radar operators monitored a growing mass of contacts, not a few, but hundreds converging simultaneously. On the gun decks, crews prepared 5-inch shells fitted with experimental radio proximity fuses, cryptically labeled VT, each containing a tiny radio transmitter that would transform anti-aircraft warfare. The immediate objective was survival, to withstand Operation Kikusui No. 1, the first in a series of 10 massive, coordinated kamikaze attacks. By 0600 hours, the sky above the fleet became filled with enemy aircraft. The low hum of hundreds of engines marked the advance of pilots committed to death rather than return. Leading the assault were specially trained aviators of the Imperial Japanese Navy's Special Attack Units, piloting Mitsubishi Zeros and Yokosuka D-4Y dive bombers loaded with 250-kilogram bombs. Behind them, older aircraft, repurposed for suicide missions, surged forward in waves. Among these formations, even more unusual weapons appeared. Rocket-powered flying bombs, carried aloft by Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers, each piloted by volunteers bound to a one-way mission. The ensuing engagement would highlight the decisive impact of American proximity-fuze technology, revealing why these fearsome kamikaze tactics, initially devastating, would ultimately fail against the most advanced anti-aircraft defenses assembled in the Pacific. The VT fuse, introduced after 2 years of rigorous testing in the theater, had its origins in a singular historic experiment. Conceived in 1940 by Section T of Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory under Dr. Merle Tuve, the project rapidly became one of the war's 3 most secret and consequential endeavors, alongside radar and the atomic bomb. The fuse's design was elegantly straightforward: a miniature radio transmitter and receiver embedded within each shell. The device continuously emitted radio waves and monitored their return. When the wave's frequency shifted, indicating proximity to a target, the fuse triggered detonation automatically. This eliminated the need for gunners to estimate distances manually or to rely on mechanical timers. The shell itself decided the optimal moment to explode. Engineering the VT fuse presented extraordinary challenges. Tiny glass vacuum tubes, produced by Sylvania, had to survive accelerations exceeding 20,000 times the force of gravity as the shell launched from a 5-inch gun. The projectiles traveled at over 2,600 feet per second while rotating at 25,000 revolutions per minute due to the gun's rifling. Every component had to endure this violent launch and then operate reliably across extreme temperature ranges, from 100 degrees Fahrenheit in tropical conditions to -50 degrees Fahrenheit in high-altitude tests. The successful deployment of this technology would change the dynamics of naval anti-aircraft defense, turning the sky into a lethal barrier that no kamikaze formation could penetrate with impunity. By the spring of 1945, American industry had produced in excess of 15 million proximity fuses for naval use in the Pacific theater, a staggering output reflecting the prioritization of advanced defensive technology. Production was spread across a vast network of contractors. The Crosley Corporation alone manufactured 525,913 fuses, accounting for nearly a quarter of the total. In addition, RCA, Eastman Kodak, General Electric, and McQuay Norris collaborated with 87 other firms across 110 factories, each engaged in specialized stages of fuse production. This distributed system allowed the United States Navy to deploy unprecedented quantities of highly reliable VT-fused ammunition, equipping every destroyer, cruiser, and battleship with a decisive edge against aerial attacks. By 1945, proximity fuses represented 3/4 of all naval anti-aircraft shells, up from a mere 25% in 1943. This shift reflected hard-earned lessons from early Pacific engagements, where conventional munitions proved insufficient against determined suicide attacks. The American fleet now possessed a weapons system that combined technological sophistication, mass production, and strategic integration, enabling ships to defend themselves against waves of incoming aircraft with unmatched effectiveness. In stark contrast, Japan's Kamikaze program emerged from desperation following devastating losses at the Marianas and the Philippine Sea. These defeats had stripped the Japanese Navy of much of its experienced aircrew and carrier capacity. In response, Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, commander of the 1st Air Fleet, initiated the formation of special attack units in October 1944. His rationale was stark. Conventional aerial tactics could no longer penetrate the overwhelming firepower of the American fleet, and only a new, radical approach could inflict significant damage. Kamikaze operations sought to convert Japan's remaining pilots into human-guided weapons. Statistically, the approach seemed promising. Standard attacks against heavily defended U.S. vessels rarely achieved a hit rate above 2%. In contrast, early kamikaze strikes during the Philippines campaign demonstrated effectiveness exceeding 34%. A single Zero fighter carrying a 250-kilogram bomb could destroy or disable a destroyer, exchanging one pilot and an aging aircraft for potentially hundreds of casualties and millions of dollars in material damage. Training for these volunteers was minimal, emphasizing ritualistic and spiritual preparation over technical proficiency. Many pilots logged fewer than 100 flight hours, compared with the 500-plus hours of Japanese aviators in earlier campaigns, such as Pearl Harbor. Instruction focused narrowly on essential skills: basic navigation, identification of enemy ships, and mastering the final diving approach intended to penetrate American anti-aircraft defenses. Before departure, pilots wrote farewell letters, participated in ceremonial sake toasts, and received traditional symbols such as samurai swords or rising sun headbands, reinforcing the cultural and symbolic dimensions of their sacrifice. This juxtaposition, American industrial power producing millions of technologically advanced fuses versus Japan's human-guided aircraft reliant on undertrained pilots, exemplified the broader strategic imbalance in the Pacific by 1945. One side leveraged scalable, reliable technology to multiply defensive and offensive capabilities, while the other depended on courage and ritual to compensate for material and logistical inferiority. No amount of ritualistic preparation or spiritual resolve could compensate for the technological forces awaiting the Japanese attackers off Okinawa. Among the most extreme manifestations of the kamikaze concept was the piloted rocket-propelled bomb, which American sailors quickly dubbed the Baka, or Fool. This weapon carried a warhead weighing 1,200 kilograms and was powered by 3 solid-fuel rocket engines, allowing it to reach terminal velocities of up to 575 miles per hour. Once released, it was intended to be unstoppable. Yet its operational range was extremely limited, approximately 10 miles, necessitating that the delivery aircraft, typically Mitsubishi G4M Bettys, fly directly into the densest zones of American anti-aircraft fire. The defensive philosophy of the United States Navy stood in stark contrast. At Okinawa, ships were arranged in layered defensive formations, with radar picket destroyers positioned ahead of the main fleet to provide early warning and absorb the initial attacks. Each destroyer was armed with 12 to 16 5-inch guns capable of firing shells equipped with VT proximity fuses. These shells created overlapping fields of fire, turning the guns from area denial weapons into highly accurate defensive systems. The proximity fuse itself marked a revolution in naval gunnery. Whereas conventional timed shells required gunners to calculate distances and trajectories, VT shells detonated automatically when they neared their target. Their lethal radius expanded from 20 feet for conventional shells to approximately 70 feet, creating an almost unavoidable envelope for attacking aircraft. The morning of April 6, 1945, would demonstrate the extraordinary effectiveness of this technology. Operation Kikusingwi-1 involved a massive coordinated aerial assault. 391 Navy planes and 133 Army aircraft approached the fleet, with 215 Navy and 82 Army planes designated as Kamikaze. In total, 297 aircraft were committed as suicide attackers in a single concentrated strike. The sheer scale of the formation was overwhelming, yet the U.S. fleet's layered defenses and the precision of proximity-fused ordnance would put these attackers to the ultimate test. Commander Frederick Julian Beckton of the USS Laffey later recalled the approaching kamikaze formations as resembling a swarm of bees converging on a single flower in the desert, conveying both the intensity and inevitability of the confrontation. Despite the bravery and lethal intent of the attackers, the combination of advanced detection, rapid response gunnery, and the unprecedented lethality of VT-fused shells meant that the fleet was prepared to absorb, counter, and largely neutralize the assault before many of the aircraft could reach their intended targets. The initial kamikaze wave arrived at 0600 hours, with radar operators on the picket destroyers detecting over 50 enemy aircraft approaching from the northern sector. The ships responded immediately, unleashing 5-inch VT-fused shells at maximum effective range, approximately 12,000 yards. The impact of the proximity fuse was transformative. Each projectile detonated automatically when it approached an aircraft, sending a lethal spray of metal fragments through the sky. Unlike conventional time-fused ordnance, which required exact calculations for distance and timing, VT shells detonated automatically when they approached their target. Within minutes, numerous Japanese planes were observed plunging into the ocean, their suicide runs halted far from their intended targets. Despite these initial losses, the kamikaze assaults pressed on relentlessly. At 0744 hours, USS Laffey faced a concentrated strike. 22 enemy aircraft engaged the destroyer over an 80-minute period. Laffey's gunners expended 345 rounds of 5-inch VT ammunition, successfully neutralizing 9 attackers. The proximity fuses allowed the ship's weapons crews to switch rapidly between multiple targets, maintaining a sustained rate of fire without the delays required to adjust traditional time fuses. Japanese pilots attempted standard evasive tactics, including low-altitude approaches designed to minimize radar detection. But the VT fuses performed just as effectively against these low-flying threats, creating walls of shrapnel that shredded aircraft mere feet above the water. Even with such overwhelming defensive fire, Laffey was struck by 6 kamikaze planes and 4 conventional bombs. The ship survived, a testament both to American damage control training and the fact that proximity-fused shells had prevented dozens of attackers from reaching the vessel.
The operational effectiveness of the VT fuse was no accident. It had undergone combat testing in secret since January 5, 1943, when USS Helena first fired these shells off Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Red Cochran, commanding Helena's aft 5-inch battery, achieved a remarkable early success, shooting down a Japanese D-3A Val dive bomber with the second of 3 salvos. The shells had detonated near the aircraft rather than striking it directly, scattering lethal fragments that tore the plane apart. This engagement validated 3 years of intensive development that had overcome immense technical challenges. The fuses themselves contained roughly 130 miniature electronic components, each manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch and fitted within a space smaller than a pint milk bottle. By the Okinawa campaign, post-action assessments demonstrated the quantitative advantage of proximity-fused ammunition. Conventional time-fused 5-inch shells required an average of 1,162 rounds to destroy a single kamikaze, whereas VT-fused shells reduced this to just 310 rounds per aircraft, a nearly 4-fold improvement in efficiency. Under ideal conditions, the results were even more remarkable. The destroyer escort USS Abercrombie in May 1945 successfully eliminated a kamikaze target with only 2 VT rounds. These outcomes highlighted the revolutionary impact of electronic fusing on naval anti-aircraft operations and underscored why Japanese kamikaze tactics, devastating in early encounters, could not prevail against the most advanced defensive systems of the Pacific theater. On May 4, 1945, the destroyer USS Morrison faced an intense kamikaze assault. Utilizing 5-inch shells equipped with proximity fuses, her gunners neutralized 8 incoming aircraft within a matter of minutes, though ultimately the sheer volume of attackers overwhelmed the ship's defenses. The psychological effect on the Japanese pilots was immediate and profound. Those who survived and aborted their missions later recounted the harrowing experience of advancing toward American formations, only to be met with walls of detonating shells. The distinctive bursts of black smoke from the VT rounds appeared with near-predictive precision, creating the impression that the American gunners could anticipate every maneuver. Japanese doctrine had relied on low-altitude, high-speed approaches to reduce exposure to anti-aircraft fire. Yet the VT fuse rendered such tactics virtually meaningless. Ordnance that would have passed harmlessly 50 feet from its target now detonated lethally close, transforming the final dive into a perilous gauntlet. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, coordinating kamikaze operations from Kyushu, noted in his diary the escalating effectiveness of American anti-aircraft defenses. By the end of April, Japanese intelligence concluded that fewer than 25% of kamikaze sorties were successfully reaching their intended targets, a marked decline from the 1/3 success rate achieved during the earlier Philippines campaign. Japanese reports attributed this drop to what they described as a new type of shell, which exploded with unprecedented precision. Ugaki observed, "The enemy's defensive firepower has grown extraordinary. Our special attack aircraft are being destroyed at ranges we previously considered safe." American sailors became near mythical figures within their task forces, particularly those operating 5-inch guns armed with VT-fused ammunition. On the destroyer USS Hugh W. Hadley, gunners claimed 17 confirmed kills during the kamikaze attack of May 11th alone. The crews had perfected a method of continuous leading fire, establishing a wall of detonating shells through which incoming aircraft were forced to pass. Each gun could fire approximately 15 rounds per minute, with each shell autonomously detecting and exploding near its target. During one sustained 52-minute engagement, Hadley's gunners repeatedly destroyed multiple kamikaze planes in succession. The VT fuse ensured that even rounds passing above or below fast-moving aircraft would detonate effectively, significantly increasing the lethality of every shot. A similar demonstration occurred aboard USS Aaron Ward on May 3rd, when 40 kamikaze aircraft attacked the ship. Her 5-inch batteries maintained near-constant fire for 52 minutes, eliminating 6 enemy planes and inflicting severe damage on 5 others, causing them to crash into the sea. Commander William Saunders later testified that without the proximity-fuse shells, the destroyer would have been overwhelmed within the first 10 minutes of the attack. The technology allowed gunners to engage multiple threats simultaneously without performing precise range calculations, something conventional time-fused shells could not achieve. This capacity for rapid adaptive targeting made the proximity fuse an unparalleled force multiplier, transforming defensive gunnery into a decisive factor in the Pacific theater.
Across the U.S. Pacific Fleet, the impact of proximity-fused ammunition was multiplied exponentially. between April 6 and June 22, 1945, during the 10 large-scale Kikusui operations, Japanese forces launched roughly 1,900 aircraft in coordinated kamikaze strikes. American vessels, relying heavily on 5-inch shells equipped with VT fuses, destroyed hundreds of these attackers before they could reach striking range. Analyses by the Navy's Operations Research Group indicated that ships supplied with proximity-fused rounds were 3 times more likely to survive concentrated kamikaze assaults than vessels using primarily conventional shells. The proximity fuse transformed what could have been a catastrophic tactical threat into a manageable, if still dangerous, challenge. The disparity in technological adaptation became increasingly clear as the campaign continued. U.S. forces continually refined their use of VT rounds, discovering that firing in overlapping patterns created lethal fragmentation zones through which enemy aircraft were forced to pass. Ships coordinated their fire to produce these VT boxes, effectively establishing aerial kill zones. Japanese pilots attempted to respond with tactical innovation, launching dawn attacks, approaching from multiple directions, mixing standard and suicide aircraft, but none of these measures could overcome the fundamental advantage of a shell that detonated automatically near its target. Industrial capacity told its own story. By June 1945, American production facilities were churning out 70,000 proximity fuses per day. Over the course of the war, more than 22 million VT fuses were manufactured at a total cost exceeding $1 billion in 1940s currency, equivalent to roughly $15 billion today. Crossley Corporation alone employed 10,000 workers across 3 shifts, operating 7 days a week. Efficiency gains drove the unit cost down from $732 in 1942 to just $18 by 1945. This investment paid off decisively. Navy assessments concluded that the widespread use of proximity fuses prevented the loss of dozens of ships during the Okinawa campaign alone. In stark contrast, Japan lacked the industrial infrastructure to produce anything comparable. Although Japanese engineers understood the concept, and intelligence reports from Germany had even reached Japan via submarines, the nation could not replicate the sophisticated technology. Producing the miniature vacuum tubes required for VT fuses demanded precision manufacturing beyond Japan's war-damaged industry. Radar systems necessary to exploit proximity fuses remained rudimentary. The Type 22 naval radar, Japan's most advanced set, operated at wavelengths that precluded miniaturization, making any attempt at mass production impossible. The operational success of the fuse forced changes in Japanese kamikaze tactics. By May 1945, pilots were ordered to approach American fleets from higher altitudes before diving steeply onto targets, attempting to reduce exposure to VT-fused anti-aircraft fire. In practice, this tactic reduced losses during approach, but made accurate targeting extremely difficult. Ships could maneuver out of dive paths, and higher altitudes gave radar operators more time to track and engage incoming aircraft. The intended adjustment inadvertently diminished the overall effectiveness in Japanese attacks. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, overseeing amphibious operations at Okinawa, credited the VT fuse with enabling the invasion. In correspondence with the Chief of Naval Operations, Turner noted, "Without the proximity fuse, our casualties from suicide attacks would have been intolerable. The Japanese kamikaze was a potent weapon, capable of altering the course of the Pacific War had we not possessed superior anti-aircraft technology." Similarly, Admiral Mark Mitcher, whose flagship USS Bunker Hill survived a severe kamikaze strike on May 11th, attributed the vessel's survival in part to proximity-fused fire destroying several additional attackers that might otherwise have finished the crippled carrier. Admiral R. Lee Burke, Mitchler's chief of staff, later reflected in a 1978 interview on the decisive role of proximity-fused shells, emphasizing their transformative effect on fleet defense and their central role in preserving U.S. naval strength during the Okinawa campaign.
It is rolled as Chief of Staff to Admiral Mitcher, overseeing the fast carrier task forces. Admiral R. Lee Burke noted that all 5-inch 38 and 5-inch 25 ammunition had been equipped with proximity fuses. These VT rounds were responsible for shooting down enemy aircraft by the dozens in each engagement. Without them, Burke and his colleagues believed that the Navy would have suffered dramatically higher losses among carriers and their air wings during the final 6 months of the war. The significance of the proximity-fuze extended well beyond raw kill counts. It fundamentally reshaped the psychological dynamics that had underpinned kamikaze operations. Japanese doctrine had been based on a grim calculation. The guaranteed death of the pilot could be justified if it resulted in a near-certain hit on an American ship. By Okinawa, with VT-fuse defenses in place, the odds of a successful strike had dropped below 20%. For the young pilots pressed into these special attack units, many of them university students, the realization that their missions were increasingly futile undermined the entire philosophical basis of the kamikaze strategy. Post-war analysis of letters and diaries revealed a growing awareness among these pilots that their sacrifice would likely produce minimal results. The stark contrast in outcomes between early campaigns and Okinawa was clear. Lieutenant Yukioki, who led Japan's first organized kamikaze unit in October 1944, had achieved remarkable results against lightly defended escort carriers when only a quarter of American anti-aircraft ammunition carried VT fuses. By 1945, his successors faced an entirely different scenario. Lieutenant Commander Goro Nonaka, commanding the Thunder God Corps and deploying Oker-piloted bombs, lost his entire squadron on March 21st without a single bomb reaching launch altitude. All 18 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers were intercepted by radar-guided American fighters. Even if they had broken through, the dense wall of VT-fused anti-aircraft fire would have rendered the attack impossible. The technological sophistication of the proximity fuse went far beyond mass production. It represented major advances in electronics, materials, and integrated systems that Japan could not replicate. Miniature vacuum tubes produced by Sylvania and Raytheon used specially formulated glass to survive the tremendous acceleration of being fired from a gun. Batteries activated by firing acceleration contained electrolytes stable for months but ready to power the fuse instantly. Radio frequencies were carefully tuned to reduce interference while maximizing detection range. Each component reflected years of research backed by virtually unlimited resources. By contrast, Japanese heavy anti-aircraft systems remained largely primitive. The Type 98 100mm AA gun, Japan's most advanced heavy weapon, still relied on manually set mechanical time fuses. Even the super battleship Yamato, on her final sortie at Okinawa, carried weapons no more advanced than those used at Pearl Harbor. When Yamato faced an American aerial swarm of over 300 planes on April 7, 1945, her 16 anti-aircraft guns fired thousands of rounds, yet destroyed fewer than 10 attackers. In that same engagement, the U.S. lost only 10 aircraft while sinking the world's largest battleship, a stark demonstration of the technological imbalance. The proximity fuse also enabled novel defensive tactics. American destroyers employed the VT umbrella technique, launching proximity-fused shells in coordinated arcs above friendly vessels. These patterns created protective domes of shrapnel that incoming kamikaze aircraft were forced to penetrate. High-speed weapons like the Oker-piloted bombs, nearly impossible to track with conventional fire control, were vulnerable to these overlapping spheres of fragments. Throughout the Okinawa campaign, from April 1st to June 22nd, the U.S. Navy fired approximately 150,000 VT-fused 5-inch rounds. Though representing only 45% of the total heavy anti-aircraft ammunition expended, VT rounds accounted for the overwhelming majority of confirmed kamikaze kills at longer ranges, underscoring their transformative effect on naval defense.
During the Okinawa campaign, conventional time-fused shells, which made up 55% of anti-aircraft rounds, demonstrated utility primarily at close ranges, where precise targeting was less crucial. Mathematical analyses confirmed that VT-fused shells were 3 to 4 times more effective in neutralizing kamikaze aircraft. The human toll mirrored this disparity. Ships that exhausted their proximity-fused ammunition and were forced to rely on time-fused rounds suffered dramatically higher casualties during follow-on attacks. The destroyer USS Drexler provides a stark example. After expending its supply of VT shells on May 28th, the ship was struck by 2 kamikazes in rapid succession and sank in under a minute. 158 sailors lost their lives, more than many destroyers experienced across entire campaigns, highlighting the critical protective value of proximity-fused munitions. Even seasoned commanders like Admiral Raymond Spruance encountered the kamikaze threat personally. In March, his flagship, USS Indianapolis, was hit, prompting his transfer to USS New Mexico, which endured another strike in May. Spruance later emphasized that while the kamikaze was inherently dangerous, VT fuses had been decisive in saving countless lives and ships, creating the difference between tolerable and catastrophic losses. The strategic implications were profound, particularly in planning for Operation Downfall, the intended invasion of the Japanese home islands. Intelligence assessments suggested Japan had reserved roughly 10,000 aircraft for suicidal attacks against the invasion fleet. However, U.S. planners confident in the performance of proximity fuses calculated that available anti-aircraft resources would suffice. By September 1945, production of VT fuses was projected to reach 100,000 per day, with improved Mark 53 and Mark 58 models entering mass manufacture. The invasion fleet would have carried over 1 million proximity-fused shells, creating an anti-aircraft network of unprecedented scale. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki rendered this ultimate test unnecessary. Yet the existence and proven effectiveness of VT ammunition likely factored heavily into Japanese calculations regarding surrender. Captured Japanese documents confirmed their recognition of the futility of kamikaze attacks against proximity-fused defenses. Admiral Semu Toyota, chief of Japan's Naval General Staff, testified that homeland defense kamikaze operations would have achieved under 10% effectiveness against American VT-equipped fleets, rendering the tactic strategically meaningless. Post-war studies further revealed the vast industrial coordination behind the VT program. 112 companies collaborated alongside the main contractors to produce the most advanced military electronics of the era. British scientists, who had conceived the proximity fuse concept in 1940 but lacked the resources to bring it to fruition, acknowledged that American industrial capability had achieved what they had deemed impossible. Specifically, producing vacuum tubes capable of surviving the enormous accelerations of gun launch had once been considered insurmountable. American engineers proved otherwise. The impact of VT-fused ammunition extended far beyond the Pacific conflict. The principles developed for smart munitions, projectiles that detect and respond to their environment, laid the foundation for decades of U.S. weapons development. Modern anti-aircraft missiles and shipboard defensive systems, including close-in weapons, trace their conceptual lineage directly to the proximity fuse. In effect, American technology had shown that human-directed attacks could be countered and neutralized through superior electronics, fundamentally altering the calculus of combat. Japanese veterans continued to express awe at the fuse's effectiveness. Commander Tadashi Nakajima, instrumental in establishing the Kamikaze program, remarked that American proximity fuses operated with a seeming preternatural precision, detonating exactly where enemy aircraft flew. He recognized that these devices destroyed not only the aircraft, but the very premise of Japan's special attack doctrine, that moral resolve and self-sacrifice could compensate for material inferiority. Captain Aichiro Gio, an early advocate of kamikaze tactics, later reflected that while Japanese planners had believed sheer willingness to die could secure victory, The electronic fuse proved that technology could nullify even the most determined human effort. The proximity fuse, therefore, was more than a weapon. It was a decisive statement about the realities of modern industrial warfare, demonstrating that ingenuity, mass production, and electronic intelligence could outmatch courage alone.
The confrontation between proximity-fused shells and kamikaze assaults illustrated a fundamental divergence in military philosophy. The American approach emphasized the preservation of life through superior technology, whereas the Japanese approach treated human lives themselves as expendable weapons. By rendering suicide attacks survivable for American forces, the proximity fuse undermined the underlying logic that sent young Japanese men to deliberate death. In this sense, the electronic fuse was more than a technological triumph, it was a statement about the ethics of modern warfare, demonstrating that careful innovation could protect human life while neutralizing even the most extreme forms of aggression. The legacy of the VT fuse extended far beyond the Okinawa campaign. The crash program that produced millions of these devices became a model for post-war American technological achievement, influencing fields from aerospace to computing. The collaboration between universities, private industry, and military laboratories showcased an unprecedented capacity for organized, large-scale scientific production. At the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, where the fuse was perfected, the principles and techniques developed during wartime, ranging from precision electronics to systems integration, continued to guide innovations in guided missiles, satellite navigation, and other complex defense technologies. Dr. Merle Tuve, who directed the proximity fuse program, later remarked that the success of the system was measured not only in technical achievement, but in human lives preserved. Each kamikaze intercepted by a VT shell represented a sailor returning home to his family, validating the enormous investment in research and production. For Japan, the failure of kamikaze tactics against proximity-fused defenses marked a profound military and cultural reckoning. The young pilots who perished in futile attacks were transformed in historical memory from symbols of noble sacrifice into stark examples of the consequences of strategic miscalculation and technological inferiority. The contrast between spiritual resolve and mechanical precision revealed the limitations of human courage when pitted against industrialized innovation. Modern Japan's focus on scientific and technological development in defense and industry can trace its roots to these lessons. The demonstration that disciplined engineering and systematic production could decisively outmatch sheer heroism and individual skill. The numbers make the impact tangible. Proximity-fused 5-inch shells required an average of 310 rounds to neutralize a kamikaze aircraft, compared to 1,162 rounds with time-fused shells, a more than threefold improvement. Each successful fuse meant a ship spared from destruction, a crew spared from death, and strategic momentum preserved. Across the Okinawa theater, hundreds of kamikaze planes were destroyed before reaching their targets, saving thousands of American lives and dozens of vessels, while validating the enormous wartime investment in electronic warfare. The Okinawa campaign became the ultimate proving ground for the principle that technology could defeat fatalism. Radar-guided fighters, proximity-fused anti-aircraft artillery, and advanced damage control systems combined to counter deliberate human sacrifice. Japanese pilots, courageous but outmatched, flew directly into lethal corridors they could not anticipate. Their losses tactically significant, but strategically irrelevant. Even as they inflicted damage that stunned American crews, they could not halt the inexorable advance of the invasion. The proximity-fuze transformed their sacrifice from a potentially decisive threat into a manageable tactical problem. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal summarized the strategic significance succinctly. The VT-fuze had been essential to the Navy's advance on Japan, allowing surface forces to move with far fewer losses than otherwise possible. Across the theater, this assessment was universally recognized. Electronic intelligence had neutralized a form of warfare previously thought unstoppable.
The statistical record underscores the magnitude of the achievement. During the Okinawa campaign, 36 American ships were sunk and 368 damaged by kamikaze attacks. Terrible losses, yet a small fraction of what would have been expected without VT technology. Of 4,970 American sailors killed in kamikaze actions at Okinawa, these represented far fewer casualties than projected in pre-campaign analyses. Japanese losses were catastrophic. Approximately 1,900 aircraft and pilots were expended in organized kikusui operations, with hundreds more lost in improvised suicide missions, achieving limited tactical results but falling far short of strategic objectives. Ultimately, the success of the proximity-fuze against kamikaze attacks demonstrated a decisive lesson of modern warfare. Technological superiority can outweigh advantages in numbers, human determination, or even the willingness to sacrifice one's life. Precision engineering and mass production transformed what might have been overwhelming threats into manageable challenges, securing both material and human advantages. In the waters off Okinawa, the combination of innovation, industrial capacity, and tactical foresight decisively illustrated that in the modern era, survival and victory are inseparable from technological mastery. American sailors operating 5-inch guns loaded with proximity-fused ammunition possessed an overwhelming advantage over Japanese pilots committed to one-way missions. Each DT shell, containing a compact radio transmitter within its nose, embodied the combined force of industrial infrastructure, scientific expertise, and organizational precision that human courage alone could not overcome. When these electronic devices confronted kamikaze pilots over the waters of Okinawa, the outcome had already been determined, not in the air, but in factories in Cincinnati, laboratories in Maryland, and in the broader American conviction that technology could protect life while securing victory. The numerical and physical reality was unambiguous. A single VT fuse weighing less than 5 pounds and comprised of roughly 130 miniature electronic components, manufactured at a cost of $18 by 1945 and active for mere seconds, could neutralize a kamikaze aircraft along with its pilot. That pilot represented not only hours of flight training and physical courage, but also the material resources of tons of aircraft aluminum, steel, and other essential materials combined with a human life that could never be restored. Scaled across thousands of naval engagements throughout the Pacific theater, this technological equation produced a decisive, multiplicative effect that contributed directly to American operational success. The success of proximity-fused ammunition against kamikaze attacks validated the fundamental principles guiding American military strategy in the 20th century: investment in innovation, confidence in industrial production, and the understanding that superior technology could overcome even extreme human determination. For Japan, the failure of their suicide tactics against VT-fused shells represented a far deeper setback than a mere tactical defeat. It invalidated the belief that spiritual resolve could compensate for technological inferiority. The so-called divine wind, once a symbol of invincibility, was now rendered impotent by mechanical precision. Okinawa demonstrated that in modern naval warfare, survival depended on the ability to engage and destroy aircraft before they could strike. Nations capable of designing, mass-producing, and deploying advanced defensive systems possessed decisive strategic advantages over those reliant solely on human valor. The confrontation between VT-fuses and kamikaze aircraft exemplified this principle with stark clarity. Electronic sophistication neutralized human sacrifice.
The deployment of proximity-fused ammunition established a new baseline for technological dominance in combat. American anti-aircraft defenses, enhanced by rigorous testing, mass production, and systematic tactical application, achieved 3 to 4 times the effectiveness of conventional shells. The number of rounds required to destroy a kamikaze dropped by approximately 73%, dramatically reducing ship losses, preserving lives, and creating operational conditions that favored sustained offensive action. When multiplied across the vast distances and multiple theaters of the Pacific Campaign, these efficiencies translated directly into strategic advantage, reinforcing the centrality of technology in modern warfare. The VT-fuse represented the apex of American military engineering. Careful scientific design, industrial-scale production, and methodical problem-solving applied to the battlefield. Its ability to counter the kamikaze demonstrated unequivocally that victory in contemporary conflict belonged to those who could conceive, manufacture, and deploy superior technology. Beyond individual battles, the success of proximity fuses shaped post-war military doctrine, cementing technological innovation as the foundation for future defense strategy. Ultimately, the electronic fuse did more than neutralize enemy aircraft. It confirmed the overarching American approach to war. By showing that technological quality could decisively offset even the most extreme human sacrifices, it underscored a new paradigm in which strategic outcomes depended less on sheer courage or numerical advantage and more on the effective application of knowledge, engineering, and industrial capacity. The VT-fuse, in this sense, was both a weapon and a proof of principle. In modern warfare, technological superiority could determine the survival of men and ships alike and shape the course of global conflict.